It was the kind of opportunity most people could only dream of, an inheritance that seemed to promise a fresh start. The old house on Hawthorne Hill had been left to Lily and her husband, Mark, after her distant aunt passed away unexpectedly. It was the kind of grand, sprawling estate that was easy to romanticize, with ivy-covered walls, towering trees, and windows that seemed to watch over the world. Mark was thrilled by the idea of restoring it, bringing it back to life. Lily, however, felt an odd sense of unease as soon as she laid eyes on it. The house had been abandoned for years, and it was clear that time had taken its toll. There was no denying the beauty of the place, but the creeping vines and dilapidated exterior made it seem like something out of a forgotten story. Still, the idea of a quiet life away from the chaos of the city was too tempting to pass up. The decision had been made, and now they were here, standing at the door of their new home. Mark was already inside, tossing open windows to let in some fresh air. "It's perfect," he said with a grin. "A little work and it'll be beautiful." Lily stood on the porch, staring at the house's grand entrance. There was a feeling in the air, a coldness that she couldn't shake. She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the unease gnawing at her. "It's beautiful," she replied, though her voice was laced with hesitation. She forced herself to smile and stepped inside. The interior was just as eerie. The air was thick, musty with the scent of old wood and forgotten memories. The floors creaked with every step they took, and dust hung in the air like an unwelcome presence. It was like stepping into the past, a world that had been locked away for too long. That night, as they settled into their new home, Mark was already thinking about renovations. He was so caught up in the excitement that he didn't notice Lily's growing discomfort. They unpacked their things, but every creak of the house, every gust of wind, seemed amplified in the silence. Later, after Mark had fallen asleep, Lily lay in bed wide awake. The house groaned and shifted, but it wasn't the sounds of settling that disturbed her. It was the whispering. Faint and barely audible at first, the whispers grew louder, circling in her ears like a swarm of unseen voices. "Lily." Her blood ran cold. She turned toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, but there was nothing. The moonlight illuminated only the trees that swayed gently in the wind. Her heart pounded as she pulled the covers tighter around herself. "Just the wind," she muttered to herself, but the whispers continued. The next morning Lily tried to shake off the fear. It was just an old house, she told herself. Her mind was playing tricks. But Mark noticed her unease and asked about it. "You okay?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice as they ate breakfast. "Yeah, just a little tired," she said, forcing a smile. "I think the house is just a lot more than I expected." Mark nodded. "It's going to take some getting used to, but we'll make it work." Despite his reassurances, Lily couldn't let go of the feeling that something was terribly wrong with the house. That night the whispers returned. But this time they were stronger. She heard them even as she lay wide awake, and they weren't just words anymore. It was as if someone was standing right beside her, breathing heavily in her ear. "Lily, we are here." Her breath caught in her throat. She turned over to Mark, shaking him awake, but he didn't respond. He was still, his face pale as though frozen in sleep. Lily pulled the blankets tighter around her, trying to ignore the chill that had suddenly settled in the room. The whispers continued, growing more frantic, more desperate. "Get out. Leave this place." Lily squeezed her eyes shut, praying it was all just a nightmare. But when she opened them again she saw it. At the edge of the room, standing in the shadowy corner, was a figure. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. A scream caught in her throat, but the figure was gone before she could make a sound. She looked over at Mark again, but still he remained motionless. Was it just a hallucination? The next day Mark was still unaware of the strange occurrences. But Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her. The shadows seemed to linger longer, and even during the day she would catch glimpses of things moving in the corners of her vision. The discovery came unexpectedly. While searching the attic for old furniture to refurbish, Lily found a series of letters. They were old, yellowed with age, and brittle to the touch. She carefully unwrapped the first one, her hands trembling as she read the faded ink. The letter spoke of an ancient curse tied to the house, a curse that had plagued its previous owners. It described unnatural deaths, disappearances, and the haunting presence of something dark that resided within the walls. Each family that moved in was driven to madness or death. Desperate cries for help filled the letters, but the words stopped suddenly as if the writer had been interrupted. Terrified, Lily began to dig deeper into the house's past. She discovered more letters, more articles, all pointing to the same chilling truth. The house had a dark history, one that spanned centuries. It was built on land steeped in blood, where rituals had once been performed to summon something terrible from beyond. That night, as Lily shared her findings with Mark, he grew defensive. "Lily, you've got to stop reading into these things. It's just superstition," he said, dismissing her fears. But Lily couldn't ignore it anymore. The house was alive with something malevolent, something ancient that was trying to get its grip on them. The hauntings grew more intense with each passing night. Objects began to move on their own. Furniture shifted, doors slammed shut with deafening force, and the walls seemed to pulse with a rhythm of their own. And then there were the visions. Lily would wake in the middle of the night to see figures standing at the foot of her bed, their hollow eyes staring into her soul. Sometimes she would hear faint cries for help, echoes of the past trapped within the house's walls. The whispering grew louder, more persistent. "Help us. Leave." Mark became distant, his eyes hollow and tired. He stopped talking about the house's restoration and spent more time in the basement, his moods darkening. Lily tried to reach out to him, but it was as if he were slipping away, drawn into the very shadows of the house. Desperation set in. The house was alive. It was feeding on them, and if they didn't escape, they would be its next victims. One night, after the house had grown silent, Lily confronted Mark. She begged him to leave, but he refused. "I can't leave," he said, his voice cold. "The house won't let me." It was then that Lily realized the full extent of the horror they were trapped in. The house had already claimed Mark, body and soul. It was only a matter of time before it took her as well. With no other choice, Lily fled, running through the halls, screaming for Mark. The house seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in as if to swallow her whole. But as she reached the door, she felt a force slam into her back, sending her crashing to the floor. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was Mark's face, twisted, a grotesque mockery of the man she had married. And then the house claimed her. The next morning, the house stood silent again, waiting for its next victim.